Let me just comment on something that the Vice President said. You talked about the big mistake in Iraq and the surge. The truth is, the big mistake, the huge mistake, and one of the big differences between you and me, I never believed what Cheney and Bush said about Iraq. You voted against the war in Iraq and helped lead the opposition. And it's sad to say, I mean, I kind of, had the feeling that there would be massive destabilization in that area if we went into that war. As the former chairman...
Bernie Sanders has had very strong debate performances, especially after the heart attack. And it's fair to say that having these strong debate performances, he's taken opportunities to hit Joe Biden. In the last debate, he hit him over the Iraq war vote. In the debate before that, he hit him over the Iraq war vote. And if I'm not mistaken, in the debate before that, he hit him in the Iraq war vote. My point is, despite his strong debate performances, his attacks on Biden have at most been ineffectual. I did a video where I made the point that Sanders has to hit Joe Biden in his mass. What I mean by that is, when you have kids who come together and those kids make a video saying Joe Biden is not for the youth, or Joe Biden is not for kids in college, so what? Everybody already knows that Joe Biden is not for kids in college. Bernie Sanders is already winning the college vote in spades. That attack is somewhat ineffectual just because it's something that he's not necessarily strong on anyway. People already accept that to be true. So making that argument is like, okay, we know that. This is kind of what's going on in regards to his attacks on the Iraq war vote. That attack on the Iraq war vote makes sense, and that attack would work if everybody on that stage was exactly the same. The differences between Sanders and Biden are so drastic that bringing up the Iraq war vote falls and falls into the elements where Sanders' base accepts it, whereas, Biden's base accepts it, whereas Sanders' base wouldn't. So yeah, he gets points for this from his own base, but his own base already was going to vote for him. It doesn't necessarily take it away from Biden for him to make this argument. When Clinton and Obama are on stage, those quantities are so similar in their characteristics that the Iraq war vote can be a deciding disqualifier. Not in this election. Not in this one. I've argued that Sanders has to hit Joe Biden on electability, and he has to hit him for the black vote. Sanders needs both of those things. He only needs a few percentage points of those things, but both of those things need to be hit as hard as you could possibly hit it, because that's the element that's keeping Joe Biden afloat. It's not love. It's this notion that Joe Biden is the guy. He's our safe bet. Regardless of his faults, regardless of his mental fits, regardless of his, mental issues, his inability to be coherent when he's on the debate stage, with the exception of the last debate. Not to mention the policy positions he's taken over the years. You need to make that case. And you need to make that case strongly. And you need to make that case in a way that everything that you hold dear is at stake. And Sanders, having a conversation with the LA Times, I don't know if he's been watching my show, but he does venture into this argument of electability. And makes the point that he, not Biden, he, Sanders, is the most electable. He goes so far as to say that Donald Trump would eat Joe Biden's lunch if Biden was the nominee. Biden responds to this, but I want to go into the interview itself. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. You can say Soapbox After Dark. When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. It is brought to you by you, so every dollar helps. I saw this and I thought, hallelujah! Bernie Sanders has been watching my channel. You finally hitting him on something that's consequential. However, you can't do this necessarily just in an article. This has to be done proactively, even on a debate stage. You don't have to be rude, you don't have to be mean, but you do need to create a difference between who you are and who Biden is, specifically geared towards the areas to which he has strength. One of the things that plagued me in the last debate is that Sanders needs the black vote and he needs the elderly vote, and he didn't take the opportunity to make his points on those specific avenues in the last debate. Meaning, debates are not absolutes. There are things in debates that you need to accomplish, and there are things that are to your benefit as a candidate, that you need to get across in a large arena platform, meaning with a lot of eyes watching. When Buttigieg, who gets 2% or 0 to 2% of the black vote, knowing he can't and he has no chance of winning with numbers like that, goes so far as to say, I support elements of reparations. Why is he doing that? He's doing that because he's suffering and is in need of the black vote. If Sanders got the opportunity, Sanders should have brought up this.
Paul Ryan was correct when he did the tax code. What's the first thing he decided we had to go after? Social Security and Medicare.
This is Joe Biden agreeing with Paul Ryan on cuts to Social Security. And by the way, that's not just him saying once. Here's him saying it again. He wanted to make sure you knew where he stood.
I mean, whatever happened to that old conservative discipline about paying for what you spend? I'm up for re-election this year, and I'm going to remind everybody what I did at home, which is going to cost me politically. When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time.
This is a Democrat arguing for cutting Medicare and Social Security. I got to be honest. If nothing else, if everything falls apart, every last Democrat on this planet should be in favor of maintaining, if not expanding, Social Security and benefits to Medicare. And yet, you have him, Joe Biden, talking about cutting it. This should come up in debates, and yet it never has. This should be one of the talking points that you end up with in the debates when a question even ventures into this area. Why? Because you need to carve out a certain element of Joe Biden's support. And that support, honestly, from the standpoint of the older vote, should be with you anyway. You need to take opportunities to bring stuff like this up. My point is, when Sanders makes this case that Trump will eat Joe Biden's lunch, his argument basically boils down to Joe Biden has a litany of issues that Donald Trump can exploit if Joe Biden was the primary nominee. Including, and he didn't bring this up, and so let me just read what Sanders said. I mean, it's an entire interview, and this part wasn't on the interview from the standpoint of him saying it, but they put it in the paper. Sanders, and let me add that if I might, there are people who run the same old type of campaign. And, former Vice President Joe Biden is a personal friend of mine, so I'm not here to, attack him. But my God, if you're Donald Trump and you got Biden having voted for the war in Iraq, Biden having voted for these terrible, in my view, trade agreements, Biden having voted for the bankruptcy bill, Trump will eat his lunch. Trump will eat his lunch. Bernie Sanders is only saying what a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters have been saying for a very long time. Joe Biden is not the politician he was in 2008. And this notion of having a rerun in 2016, believing that you're going to get a different result, not with Joe Biden. I know people believe that Joe Biden is electable, but those people also thought that Trump could never win office, that Hillary Clinton was electable, that Trump was working with the Russians. There are a litany of issues that these people have been entirely wrong on. Electability boils down to who you think the public will accept. Your vision of this thing that's out there that we consider to be the world, particularly in the context of the United States. What do you think it looks like? And who do you think they will accept? The catch here is that oftentimes the only people that you're talking to are people similar to you. Meaning you're talking to people who are, for the most part, in your own sandbox, whether that's an elderly home, whether that's people at your church, whether that's people at your family. I guess my point is, the notion of electability is not entirely a real thing. I mean, I suppose there's a reality to it, but the catch is that what people are calling electable are only their thoughts, not reality. Those are different things. Sanders' point, Trump will eat Joe Biden's lunch. Before I did this video, I sat here and wrote down multiple things that Trump could be attacked on that Sanders would never mention. Hunter Biden. Joe Biden has said he would ignore a subpoena, a legally drawn subpoena for him to testify. He will ignore. You don't think this will come up on the campaign trail? Hillary Clinton got dogged by those emails. What do you think is going to happen to Joe Biden with this notion of his son being corrupt? And what do you think that means for him ever able to use the argument about Trump's corruption, knowing A, that he is talking about ignoring a legal subpoena to testify, and B, that him and his son for years have been involved, and people call it soft corruption. I don't know why they call it soft. Corruption is what it is.
Stand by your earlier statements that you wouldn't comply if you were subpoenaed to testify in an impeachment trial before the Senate?
Correct. And the reason I wouldn't is because it's all designed to deal with Trump doing.
Regardless of the reason why you wouldn't, what it boils down to is you're saying you will ignore, you will blow off a legal subpoena, testify. Whether Joe Biden accepts that subpoena, whether that subpoena is political, whatever his reasonings for it, are you telling me that this will not be something that will dog Joe Biden this entire campaign? Hillary Clinton ran her race with a indictment hanging over her head for a good part of a year. Biden, in this case, where the news is being hit with this notion of him and his son being somewhat corrupt, and with questioning on that, which is legit questioning, by the way, he's going to ignore it. You don't think that's going to dog him in this race? What about the crime bill? Joe Biden had been pushing to put black people in prison, working with segregationists to do so. And the reason I say putting black people in prison, because he understood that the disparity between blacks and whites had to do with the way that the drug crack versus cocaine was considered. And they kept that in regardless. He was the number one proponent of this. Trump is going to say, I am the guy who's getting people out of prison. He was the guy that was putting people in prison. The Iraq war vote is true, but I got to be honest. I think the Social Security thing and the crime bill thing are far worse, not to mention the corruption with Hunter Biden, because that negates anything that you're going to say about Trump. I know Democrats say that he's massively corrupt, but I'm sorry, it is going to get airplay on the quote-unquote soft corruption between Biden and his kid. These are just 4 items, but these items are big. The trade bill, same thing. Joe Biden supported these trade bills. Trump is going to say, I'm the guy who was against it, and I'm this guy who rewrote it. You lose attacks on issues of racism and on issues of corruption, because basically, if you look back over Joe Biden's record, he said some really shady shit. Even recently, the black folks can't raise their kids will become a campaign hit video. Obama being well read, and Obama getting checked for venereal diseases, that will come up. I don't know. I don't think people realize how much they lose with Joe Biden. The Democratic primary is supposed to be competitive. It's supposed to be where you determine whether or not your candidates have a glass jaw. And for the most part, Biden has been coddled in this. I still say Sanders does a disservice when he doesn't necessarily hit Joe Biden in his mass, dealing with the African American vote and the things that he's said and done over the course of his career, be it the crime bill or be it the busing stuff. I also think it's somewhat of a disservice when he doesn't bring up the Social Security stuff. I guess my point is, primaries are supposed to be competitive. And this coddling process that the Democratic Party has taken is doing them a disservice. I talk about the national polls, or I talk about the polls a lot. And I talk about the polls because I talk about trends, meaning things that seem to be across a widespread number of polls in various areas. I think those things have a little bit more truth to them as opposed to the individual specific numbers. Not to mention national polls always contain a bit of a lie. Basically, our polling is not nationally. Our elections are not national. Our elections take place where the candidate has to win in state after state after state. And within the context of that winning, there's a such thing as momentum, meaning the candidate can get ahead of steam if he ends up racking up wins in multiple states. Joe Biden's key claim is electability. If you look at the polling, what you will find out is people say, yes, we trust Sanders more on immigration, we trust him more on climate, we trust him more on healthcare. You get a back and forth between trust on the economy versus between Biden and Sanders. And then you get to who's more electable, and Biden wins by 20 points. Ultimately, Sanders is seen as a risky prospect. The youth vote don't see him as a risky vote. The elderly vote, they do. They have been propagandized to for the last 40, 50 years that the best thing you can do is incrementalism. Not to mention you have an element of this, meaning the black African American vote, that wants to preserve Obama's legacy. Some of them are just terrified. Who keeps the monsters at bay? We think this is our guy. Others want to preserve the Obama legacy. But ultimately, you have a generation that have been told you can't have nice things and that the best thing you can do is the grand church of incrementalism. And now you have this guy who's talking about all these lefty policies. His argument is that this is what you need to win. Whether it's John Kerry, whether it's Al Gore, whether it's Hillary Clinton, all of these right-wing Democrats failed miserably. The guy who won was the guy who was screaming hope and change, and the public couldn't decipher. They was just like those other right-wing Democrats. The only difference is he talked differently. Sanders is betting that the real thing would win, and that Biden, having a rerun of 2016, will not. Will not. Biden responds to this. This is what Biden says.
In the general election. Senator Sanders
Great,
says
thank
with
you
your
guys.
vote,
Thank you guys.
Senator
Thank
Sanders says
you.
with your vote on the Iraq war and trade that President Trump will eat your lunch in the general election. Will he eat your lunch?
Tell him come about Gibson dessert at the White House.
Who? President Trump?
Sanders.
Okay.
He'll give Sanders dessert at the White House. Look, I really hope that Sanders realizes that one of these trends is Biden in the lead. One trend has Sanders getting the youth vote in spades. One Sanders is Biden get the elderly vote, or the elderly African American vote in spades. Sanders seems to be getting the Hispanic vote. Those are trends. Elizabeth Warren tanking in the polls. That's a trend. Buttigieg getting whites by like 90%, over 90%. That's a trend. But it's also a trend that Joe Biden remains in the lead. And it needs to be very clear that Biden could win this. Biden could sleepwalk his way into the primary or through the primaries where he would get beat like a drum by Donald Trump. Just because a poll says that they would vote for you because they think you'll beat Trump doesn't mean you get energy, doesn't mean you get money, doesn't mean you get full stadiums, doesn't mean you get any of the things that you need in order to win an election. Electability has to be a key argument for Sanders. And it can't just be him saying it in the LA Times. It needs to be explicitly made as to the reasons why Joe Biden is less electable. That needs to be a strong talking point and a strong argument. And that argument needs to be pressed every bit as much as Medicare for All, because ultimately the Medicare for All thing doesn't happen if people believe Joe Biden continues to be more electable. Let's see, who's here? Zane Jamerson, why do you think Bernie isn't attacking Biden more intensely? I don't see why he's refusing to call Biden corrupt, giving examples of his son's corruption. It's difficult to call Joe Biden corrupt and running the Democratic Party. They're sheepish about that. It's not a door that they necessarily want to open. Also, Sanders seems to be more in line with, I want to just talk about policy. My problem here, and the reason this pains me, is that campaigns are not entirely about policy. Lance Stark's got his head chopped off. Sanders is trying to build a movement, and his guess is that keeping it to this notion of policy, he wins. But it's not a policy issue. Joe Biden's ahead, not because people believe he's better on policy. Policy rarely comes up when people are talking about Biden. It's electability that people end up talking about. We think this guy's more electable. Well, you need to swift vote Joe Biden on this notion of electability. You need to tear it to shreds. Sanders doesn't seem to be the type that likes to overtly attack. He just doesn't. It plagues me too, but he just doesn't. Sharpshooter KE, good morning from Germany. Good morning from Richmond, Virginia. Sharpshooter. All right, guys, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys in a few. Thanks all. Bye-bye.